The wind roared across the open plains, cold and endless, like a warning that only the strong could survive here. No cities, no walls, no armies waiting to defend them. Just people, men, women, and children, who learned to turn the raw brutality of nature into strength. These were the Native American warriors, and long before rifles and fortresses, they had already mastered the oldest weapon on earth, the human spirit. They didn't learn courage from books or soldiers, they learned it from survival itself. Every storm, every hunt, every battle was a lesson written in blood and endurance. For them, being a warrior wasn't just about fighting. It was a way of life, a sacred path that began in childhood and never truly ended. Boys were taught early that bravery was their duty, not to seek war but to meet fear without flinching. A warrior who panicked, who hesitated, endangered not just himself but his entire tribe. That's why fear wasn't an enemy to destroy, it was a tool to control. The true test wasn't killing another man. It was mastering your own heartbeat in the silence before the fight. From the very start, children were shaped by the elements. They ran barefoot through frost, trained their eyes to see in the dark, learned to read the language of wind and animal tracks. Everything around them, the sky, the earth, even the cry of a raven, was a teacher. If the weather froze their fingers, they didn't complain. They learned to move faster, to breathe slower, to respect the cold as a partner rather than a punishment. Pain wasn't something to avoid, it was something to understand. It reminded them they were alive. And when that training was done, when the first scars had formed and the first fears were conquered, they faced the right that separated boys from men, the vision quest. Alone, often for days, sometimes weeks, they wandered into the wilderness with nothing but water and faith. No food, no shelter, just them and the spirits of the land. They were told not to fight the loneliness but to listen to it. The goal wasn't just to survive, it was to see, to find the dream or sign that revealed their purpose, their place in the circle of life. When they returned, thinner, quieter, eyes darker than before, they were no longer boys. They had seen something inside themselves that no one else could take away. This spiritual strength made Native warriors unlike any other. To them, courage was sacred, and death wasn't an enemy to fear but a part of existence to respect. When they went into battle, they painted their faces not for intimidation but as symbols of transformation, marking the line between the man they were and the spirit they might soon become. Every mark told a story. Red could mean victory. Black could mean strength or mourning. White often stood for peace, or the calm before battle. To outsiders it looked like decoration. To them it was prayer written on skin. Their weapons were simple, spears, bows, tomahawks, but their understanding of warfare was advanced beyond anything European armies expected. They didn't fight for conquest or glory. They fought for balance. War wasn't chaos, it was a tool to restore harmony when it was broken. When a tribe's hunting grounds were invaded or a treaty was broken, battle was a form of justice, harsh but necessary. And even in that there were rules. A warrior who killed without honor was seen as weak, not strong. Revenge had to serve the tribe, not the ego. Among the plains, stealth was survival. Warriors could move silently through grass higher than their heads, using the rhythm of the wind to hide their approach. They studied the shadows, learned the patience of wolves, and struck only when success was certain. Their tactics were fast, unpredictable, and psychological. One moment the land looked empty, the next, it was alive with motion and sound. Horses charging, war cries echoing like thunder. European soldiers, trained to fight in formation, never stood a chance against warriors who turned the very landscape into a weapon. And yet, behind every battle there was discipline. A native warrior didn't charge blindly. Before each raid they prepared their minds as much as their weapons. Fires were lit, prayers whispered, songs sung to honor the spirits of those who came before. They asked for guidance, not victory but clarity. Because for them, courage without wisdom was as dangerous as a weapon without aim. Even the way they treated enemies set them apart. Captured warriors were not always killed. Some were adopted, given new names, even welcomed as family, if they proved themselves worthy. This wasn't mercy in the way we think of it. It was recognition of spirit. To survive capture, to endure pain without surrender, was the ultimate test of strength. It meant you had earned respect even from those who had once sought your death. What made native warriors truly extraordinary wasn't how they fought, but why. They saw the world as a living circle. Everything connected, nothing wasted, no victory without cost. Their battles weren't about dominance, they were about protecting that circle. Every time they rode into war, they carried their ancestors, their people, and their land with them. And when they fell, it wasn't considered a defeat. It was a return, to the soil, to the wind, to the very elements that had shaped them. So, the next time someone imagines them as savages or victims of history, remember this: they were masters of survival, philosophers of war, and guardians of balance. While others built empires with walls and gold, Native Americans built something far stronger. A spirit that no storm, no army, no century could ever destroy. Before we continue, where are you watching from? The mountains, the plains, the desert? Let me know below. And if you want to hear how these warriors turned nature itself into their greatest ally, make sure you're subscribed. Because this story only gets deeper. They say a warrior's greatest weapon isn't his spear or his bow, it's his mind. And nowhere was that truer than among the Native American nations that ruled the plains and forests long before any settlers arrived. To them, every battle started long before the first arrow flew. It began in silence, in preparation, patience, and understanding of the land itself. You see, the earth wasn't just ground to stand on. It was alive, listening, and watching. The warriors didn't fight on it, they fought with it. A seasoned warrior could feel the shift in wind and know when his scent might betray him. He could hear a bird's cry and tell whether it was natural or startled by movement nearby. He could look at broken grass and read the story, how many had passed, in which direction, and how fast. Modern soldiers train with night vision and drones. Native warriors trained their senses until they became the technology. To them, the land wasn't an obstacle, it was their ally, their map, and their shield. But understanding the land was only half of it. The other half was understanding people, especially your enemies. Native tribes knew that true warfare wasn't just physical, it was psychological. You didn't always win by strength. Sometimes you won by fear, confusion, or misdirection. They perfected tactics that modern military strategists would still admire. Ambushes planned down to the hour, decoys sent to draw enemies away, and ghost-like retreats that left no tracks. Warriors could vanish into the grasslands without a trace, only to reappear miles away where the enemy least expected them. They made the open plains feel like a maze only they could navigate. Before battle, everything had meaning: the way they painted their faces, the songs they sang, the weapons they carried. Paint wasn't decoration, it was communication. Red for courage, black for strength, yellow for healing or the blessings of the sun. Every mark carried spirit and purpose. The act of painting was part prayer, part transformation, as if, once the paint touched their skin, the person vanished and only the spirit of the warrior remained. Weapons, too, weren't just tools of death, they were extensions of identity. A warrior's bow was crafted with care and ceremony, each detail symbolizing his tribe, his lineage, and his personal spirit. Feathers tied to a spear weren't random, they represented victories, dreams, or guidance from ancestors. Before going into combat, some warriors spoke to their weapons, asking them to strike true, to defend the people, to carry the will of their fathers. The line between faith and warfare blurred until they became one and the same. And when the time came, the approach to battle was as varied as the land itself. Among the plains tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche, mounted warfare redefined everything. Once horses entered their world, war transformed into something almost poetic: speed, precision, chaos in motion. A warrior on horseback could fire arrows faster than most men could reload a rifle. They leaned low against the horse's flank, using the animal's body as a living shield, guiding it with knees and instinct rather than reins. It was a dance, fast, fluid, terrifyingly efficient. Other tribes, like the Iroquois and Huron in the woodlands, mastered a different style: the silent war. Their strength wasn't in open confrontation but in ambush and misdirection. They used forests like fortresses, turning every shadow into protection, every fallen branch into cover. To their enemies, they seemed to appear out of nowhere. One moment the forest was quiet, the next it was alive with movement, arrows from unseen angles, shouts that echoed from all directions. Then silence again. That silence was their signature. But even in their fiercest moments, there were rules, an unspoken code of honor. War wasn't chaos, it was ceremony. Warriors prayed before battle not for victory but for balance. That if they were to take a life, it would be for protection, not cruelty. To kill recklessly was to disturb the order of the world, and that was the greatest sin. Many tribes believed that a warrior's spirit lingered after death, watching the one who struck him down. To fight dishonorably meant you carried that spirit's anger forever. After battle, survivors didn't celebrate as conquerors. They honored the fallen, their own and their enemies. Songs were sung, offerings left, and names remembered. In many ways, their wars were as much about spirituality as survival. They understood something that modern warfare often forgets: that violence, no matter how necessary, leaves a mark on the soul. And if that wound isn't respected, it grows into something darker. The path of the warrior wasn't for glory. It was a lifelong burden, a role that demanded both ferocity and humility. Young warriors learned that bravery wasn't about rushing into danger. It was about knowing when not to. An impulsive fighter could endanger the entire tribe. So patience was trained like muscle. Some raids were planned for weeks, even months, timed perfectly with the seasons, the moonlight, or the migration of animals. Every choice had purpose, every risk was measured. And then there were the women. Too often forgotten in tales of war, native women were both protectors and spiritual anchors. While men rode to fight, women kept the fires, cared for the wounded, and preserved the songs and traditions that gave warriors their strength. In some tribes, women fought alongside men, fierce, skilled, and unrelenting. Among the Crow and Apache, women like Buffalo Calf Road Woman or Lozan became legends, not because they wanted glory, but because the moment demanded courage. When danger came, courage had no gender. When warriors returned, their faces still marked with paint, they didn't boast about the fight. They sat quietly by the fire, letting the elders speak first. Victory was never about numbers or power. It was about survival, about ensuring the tribe would see another sunrise. For every victory there was mourning because every life lost, even an enemy's, carried weight. Songs were sung not just for triumph but for remembrance. Their victories were measured in lives saved, not enemies slain. Through all of it, one truth remained constant. They fought not to conquer but to preserve balance. Balance with nature, with their people, and with the unseen forces they believed guided all life. They didn't see themselves as rulers of the land but as part of it. So when war came, it wasn't about dominance. It was about defense, defending a way of life, a belief system, a home that existed in harmony with the world around them. And maybe that's what made them truly extraordinary. Because when the dust settled and the battle cries faded into silence, they didn't see themselves as victors or victims. They saw themselves as part of something eternal, the cycle of life, death, and renewal. They had fought to protect the circle, and the circle endured. So, as you listen to this story, think about what courage really means. It's not the absence of fear. It's the strength to face it, control it, and still act when everything inside you says to run. That was the heart of a Native American warrior, calm in the storm, fierce in defense, humble in victory. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. If you lived back then, do you think you could have survived their training, their tests, their way of life? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how these warriors prepared for battle not just with weapons, but with the power of their spirit, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of their story takes us deep into the rituals that turned ordinary people into legends. When most people today think of a warrior, they imagine armor, shields, or rows of soldiers marching in formation. But for Native American warriors, their greatest strength wasn't metal, it was meaning. Every item they wore, every symbol painted on their skin, every step taken before battle carried purpose. They didn't separate life, spirit, and war. To them, all three flowed together like rivers feeding into one source: survival. Preparation for battle began long before the enemy appeared on the horizon. It started in the quiet moments, at dawn, when the mist still hugged the earth and the fires burned low. Warriors would gather, not to shout or rally, but to listen. They listened to their elders, who spoke of ancestors and of spirits who once walked the same path. They listened to the drumbeats, the heartbeat of the earth. Those rhythms weren't random. They aligned with breathing, with heart rate, grounding every warrior in focus. Because before you can face death, you have to silence everything inside that isn't calm. For the tribes of the plains, the rituals before war were as essential as the fight itself. The Lakota, for instance, believed every battle had to begin with prayer. Warriors smoked the sacred pipe, sending their breath and their intentions into the sky. They didn't ask for victory. They asked for balance. To return home with honor whether they lived or died. To die without honor meant losing not just your life, but your spirit's peace. In their eyes, a cowardly act could follow you into eternity. Each tribe had its own ways. The Comanche fasted before major raids, cleansing their bodies and sharpening their minds. The Apache painted sacred symbols onto their chests and weapons, believing those markings carried protection. Some wore charms or small pouches filled with soil from their homeland, a piece of the earth they were fighting for. Others carried locks of hair from loved ones, reminders of why they fought in the first place. To carry love into battle, they believed, was the strongest kind of armor. Then came the moment of transformation. The war paint. To outsiders it looked simple, streaks of color on a face. But every color, every line had meaning. Red was not just blood, it was life, energy, and courage. Black was power, the color of the earth and of strength. White represented truth and peace, sometimes painted before a warrior entered battle to remind him that peace was the goal even in violence. Yellow often symbolized endurance, the light of the sun that gave strength in the darkest times. And blue, the color of the sky, meant spiritual protection. When a warrior painted his face, he wasn't disguising himself. He was becoming his truest self, the form his ancestors would recognize. Their weapons too carried spirit. Arrows were crafted in silence, with prayers whispered over each one. A bow wasn't just wood and sinew, it was alive, its strength coming from harmony between hunter and hunted, tree and man. Many warriors believed their weapons had to be fed, touched to fire, water, or earth before battle, so that all the elements could bless them. When a warrior took a life, he would sometimes raise his weapon to the sky afterward, thanking both the spirit of the enemy and the land for granting him survival. To us that might sound strange. But to them it was the highest form of respect, honoring the circle that connected killer and killed, predator and prey. Courage was sacred, but arrogance was forbidden. Warriors were warned from childhood, never boast about victory. Bravery spoke for itself. Those who bragged lost the respect of their peers, because pride broke balance. After a battle, even the greatest warriors often stayed silent. The tribe would celebrate survival but also mourn the dead, on both sides. Some tribes held purification rituals, bathing in rivers, smoking herbs, or sitting alone to cleanse their spirit of the violence it had just witnessed. Because they understood something modern soldiers still struggle with: war leaves marks you can't see. Even the way they counted honor was different. Many tribes measured bravery through what was called counting coup, a system of valor that didn't depend on killing. The highest honor wasn't taking a life, but touching an enemy in battle and returning unharmed. Imagine that, riding full speed into chaos, reaching out and tapping your opponent with a coup stick, then riding back alive. No blood, no death, just proof that you had courage greater than fear. It was a contest of spirit, not destruction. To strike first and kill was easy. To face death and show restraint, that was greatness. This mindset made native warriors both respected and feared. To outsiders it seemed unpredictable. But in truth it was built on deep discipline and understanding. They saw war as a storm, violent, necessary at times, but never something to worship. And just like storms, it could destroy everything if not respected. When peace returned, warriors returned to being hunters, fathers, and providers. They didn't live in war, they carried it like a shadow, only using it when the world demanded it. Even in peace, preparation never stopped. Every hunt was training, the patience of tracking a deer through snow, the speed of loosing an arrow in perfect silence. Every hardship was a lesson. When a harsh winter came and food ran short, that endurance became strength for future battles. When lightning struck the plains and fires burned for days, tribes studied how the wind moved and how smoke shifted, lessons later used in warfare. Nothing in nature was wasted. Everything was knowledge. To outsiders, Native American warfare looked chaotic. But it was guided by wisdom older than any army manual. They understood terrain, timing, and emotion. They could make enemies believe they were surrounded when there were only 20 riders. They could vanish into storms and attack days later from another direction. Their warfare was storytelling, full of rhythm, surprise, and message. To fight them was to fight ghosts. And yet, for all their skill, their greatest weapon remained invisible: unity. A warrior wasn't alone. He carried his people with him, their songs, their prayers, their hopes. In battle, he didn't fight for glory. He fought so the fires at home would keep burning, so the children could laugh another day. That sense of purpose made them unstoppable. Because when you fight for something bigger than yourself, you fight without fear. Every generation raised warriors not just in strength, but in empathy. They were taught that protecting life was the truest form of courage. Even when war was unavoidable, they remembered the ultimate goal: peace. To restore balance, to ensure harmony between humans and the land. That's what made them warriors of not just muscle, but spirit. Before we continue, here's a question. If courage meant restraint instead of violence, how many of us today could truly be called brave? Think about that. And if you want to hear how these same warriors faced the arrival of a new world, one that brought guns, steel, and fire, make sure to stay for the next part. Because that's where everything they believed would be tested like never before. The world that once belonged to the wind and the buffalo began to tremble beneath the weight of change. Where the plains once stretched unbroken, fences appeared like scars across the earth. The sound of hooves gave way to the creak of wagon wheels, and the smoke of sacred fires was joined, and often drowned, by the smoke of guns. For generations, Native American warriors had fought nature, hunger, and rival tribes. But now they faced a new kind of storm, one made by men who saw the land not as home but as property. At first, the tribes didn't believe these newcomers would last. They came in small numbers, struggling against the same wilderness the natives had mastered. But then they came in waves. With steel rails and rifles, they moved faster, dug deeper, and claimed more. To them, the earth was something to own. To the tribes, it was something to protect. That single difference would ignite decades of conflict that would reshape the continent forever. The Comanche, Sioux, Apache, and many others tried to negotiate first. Words carried weight, treaties were sacred. But to the settlers, treaties were paper, and paper burned easily. When promises broke, the land bled. The old warriors found themselves fighting battles that were no longer balanced. One rifle could shatter what 10 arrows could not. One railroad could bring more soldiers than the plains had seen in a lifetime. Yet still they fought. Because to surrender the land meant surrendering the heartbeat of their world. Their resistance was legendary. Small bands of riders outsmarted entire armies. They knew how to disappear into canyons, how to strike under starlight, how to move through snow without leaving a trail. Soldiers wrote in their journals that chasing them felt like chasing ghosts. For every fort built, a raid would follow. For every village burned, another would rise in the valley beyond. The plains were vast but not empty. Every hill had eyes. Every wind carried whispers of defiance. The warriors didn't just fight battles, they fought time itself. They could adapt their weapons but not the greed that followed the newcomers. The buffalo, sacred, vital, life-giving, were slaughtered by the millions not for food but for sport and profit. The sky that once darkened with herds now stretched silent. Children grew up without ever seeing the great beast that had fed their ancestors for centuries. To lose the buffalo was to lose part of the soul of the people. And when that silence settled across the plains, many knew the end of an age had come. Still, courage didn't fade. Leaders like Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Geronimo, and Quanah Parker carried the flame of resistance. They fought knowing they couldn't win in numbers, but they could win in memory. Every stand they made was a message to the future, that they had not vanished quietly. When Sitting Bull said, "I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my tribe to surrender my rifle," it wasn't pride, it was prophecy. Quanah Parker's story in particular reflected the crossroads of two worlds. Born of a Comanche chief and a white captive woman, he embodied the painful merging of cultures. He led his people through battle, then through peace, guiding them into a new era where survival meant adaptation, not surrender. Under his leadership, the Comanche preserved their identity even within the boundaries set by the U.S. government. He proved that strength could change form without breaking. After the wars, when the last warriors laid down their weapons, the land fell silent, but not defeated. The fight turned inward. Now it wasn't about spears or bullets. It was about language, stories, and survival of spirit. The U.S. forced children into boarding schools, cut their hair, forbade their songs, and punished them for speaking their own words. It was called civilizing. But for the tribes, it was another kind of war, one fought in classrooms instead of battlefields. And yet, through the quiet, resistance endured. Grandmothers whispered old words into the ears of children when the teachers weren't listening. Elders carved stories into memory instead of paper so they could never be burned. Ceremonies moved into secret, hidden in valleys or beneath moonlight, because even when the drums were silenced, their rhythm never stopped beating inside the people. Generations passed and the warriors changed shape. They became teachers, artists, protectors of heritage. Their weapons turned into voices, their battlegrounds into classrooms, film sets, and museums. The same strength that once drew bows and rode into war now builds schools, restores languages, and revives songs thought lost forever. They are still fighting, only now the enemy is forgetting. Today, when you stand on the open plains and the wind sweeps across the grass, you're standing where countless warriors once stood. The land still remembers them. It remembers the thunder of hooves, the firelight glinting off spears, the cries of those who fought not for conquest but for balance. Their spirit lingers in every sunrise and every gust of wind that rolls across the prairie. You can't bury that kind of memory. You can only listen to it. And maybe that's what the modern world needs most, to listen. Because their story isn't one of extinction. It's one of endurance. The tribes are still here. The songs still rise. The languages once nearly erased are being spoken again by new generations. Children are learning to dance the old dances, to paint the old symbols, to feel pride instead of shame. The warrior spirit has not vanished, it simply changed armor. The lesson of the Native American warrior is not about violence. It's about identity, resilience, and balance. It's about standing tall even when the world changes around you. It's about knowing who you are when everything else is trying to make you forget. And that's why their legacy matters, because in a world that often moves too fast, their story reminds us that true strength is quiet, steady, and rooted in the earth itself. So the next time you hear the wind howl across an open field, pause for a moment. Close your eyes. You might hear the faint rhythm of a drum, the whisper of prayers carried on the air, the spirit of warriors who never stopped fighting, not for power but for the right to exist. They were here before us, and they are still here now, carried forward in every heartbeat of their descendants. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all, not surviving the war but surviving the world that came after. Because even when the fire burned low, they kept it alive, one spark at a time. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, which part of their legacy resonates most with you? The courage? The endurance? The connection to the land? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to keep their stories alive, the stories of the people who refuse to vanish, make sure to subscribe. Because the more we remember, the louder their voices become. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we honor them, not by mourning what was lost but by carrying forward what survived.